Important bridging aspect of what we've tried to do today is to bring members of the community writ large here, members of our Bronx Chamber of Commerce, the individuals who are sitting somewhere in the room who are actually part of Einstein's philanthropic base. The men's division has generously taken on the challenge of helping us raise funds for Physician Scientist Career Development Award, and I see some of those folks in the audience, and they'll be at the lunch and poster session. So I think that, you know, right now it feels like we have a real partnership and an opportunity to do what we set out to do, and it's not going to be, as President-elect Obama said, something that's going to happen overnight or even in one cycle of the grant, but I think that the possibilities for the future are quite encouraging.
One of the things that I was particularly interested if Ms. Izquierdo-Hernandez could elaborate on, and she talked about her reticence about including this in the thing, but I would particularly like to hear more. You made many cogent points, particularly the obsession with genetics, though. We're sitting, in fact, and so we plead guilty, literally. This building is surnamed, besides the people who gave the funds to build it, the Center for Genetic and Translational Medicine. And I had the experience just the last Saturday in giving a talk on genetic diseases and the issue of stigma. And what the ramifications are. Maybe if I could have you just elaborate more on some of your concerns, and I might, and I think there are other genetics experts, but it's intriguing that, you know, I realize that there's a history of mistrust, etc., but are there specific aspects that you could elaborate on?
I think it's just the overall feeling when people who don't look like us come into our communities and then want to research our genetics. And it's just why. People don't understand why. And maybe it's a whole need for education at a level where everyone understands the importance of it. And I'm not taking away from that at all. But just when someone comes in and says, and we want the informed consent to agree to genetic testing, well, what's going to happen with that information? How do we know what's going to happen with it? What are you doing with it? Is it going to be sold? Is it going to be restudied? Is it going to be all of those things which may seem to you, no, that'll never happen. For us as protectors of the community, that's not the way it feels. It feels like I am approving this for what reason? And I'm encouraging my patients to sign why. What is going to be the use of this information? So I think it's again building that trust and really being well educated as best as you can and as simply as we can on why it's important. But history has shown that this kind of stuff gets out, and then before you know it, could you cite? I can't cite specifics. I've read so many of them, but just the other day I was reading an article on autism, and they now have what was the article? Autism linked to high levels of precipitation for genetically vulnerable populations. Okay, so I asked somebody, I said, why precipitation? And it probably came down to the way it was explained to me was, well, where there's high levels of precipitation, there's probably not a lot of sunlight. There's not a lot of sunlight, there's probably a vitamin D deficiency, so maybe autism is linked to in deficiency of vitamin D. But in genetically vulnerable populations, I don't know what that means. I don't know it.
Well, let me. I think this is a terrific example and an important opportunity for discussion. There's an institute at the National Institutes of Health, used to be headed by Francis Collins, National Human Genome Research Institute, and 10% of its budget was set aside for what was the acronym was ELSI, Ethical, Legal, Social Implications of Genetic Research. And I would say from this conversation that it's failed in the sense that the whole goal of that ELSI program was to dispel some inevitable misunderstandings. And again, I'm not an apologist for genetics. I don't consider myself a geneticist, although I've worked on some diseases that have a genetic basis. But one of the things I think we need to be leery of is actually stigmatization of genetics, in the sense that when diagnoses were made in the past, Dr. Crowley talked about the aquatic era of endocrinology, and diagnoses were made in urine by sampling urine or done on a blood test. And in these cases, when you go for an insurance physical and they take your blood pressure, why is that less intrusive or less significant than getting a gene tested? So not to be disingenuous about this, but I think it's kind of a buzzword. It has almost kind of an extra aura. And actually relevant to this conversation, probably before you came, Dr. Shamoon talked about the fact that you're not to bring food into the auditorium. And I referred to a certain distinguished scientist named Jim Watson. Jim Watson, the co-discoverer of the double helix of DNA, and the head at that time of the Cold Spring Harbor labs, where they had this new auditorium, and he was standing guard so they don't bring coffee in. Do you know, this is an example, though, of some of the issues of stigmatization and some of the reasons that genetics gets a bad rap. I don't know if you know the vignette of what happened. Watson has, in addition to his brilliance and his being a Nobel laureate, a phenomenal capability of sticking his foot in his mouth on numerous occasions. And he was on a lecture tour in the United Kingdom when he made the statement, unsupported, I think, by any rigorous scientific data, that African Americans in general are less intelligent than Caucasians. That finally was the straw that finally removed him as even Chancellor Emeritus or Director Emeritus of the Cold Spring Harbor Lab. But that wasn't the end of the story. Anyone in the audience know the denouement of that story? I hope I'm not inventing it or that it's an urban legend. Jim Watson is one of the few individuals so far, Craig Venter, whom I happen to know is another example, who had his entire genome sequenced and put out publicly. So when we say the entire genome, not just one gene or a susceptibility gene or whatever, but all 3 billion base pairs sequenced close. I mean, you can't do all of them, and put in a public database. Guess what emerged when they analyzed this? He has African heritage in his genome. And it's actually not a joke. This is, in part, what gets a bit scary about this. You can actually now, with pretty much certainty, and it's gotten so acute, I think Dr. Barzilai talked about genome-wide association studies and the fact that individuals now can get these massive amounts of genetic data sequenced and put up on databases. And the NIH has now actually taken a step back with regard to the public accessibility of some of that data. On the one hand, they want to make it publicly accessible so that the best minds everywhere can access this data, which was derived from taxpayer dollars, and ultimately benefit the public. After all, the purpose of all this is to improve public health. But the problem is that the nature of the power of analyzing this genetic data is you could actually identify a specific individual based now on this tremendous amount of data. And then that raises questions about discrimination, insurability, and a variety of other things. The same Francis Collins was one of the people leading advocate for final passage, and still President Bush, as John Stewart calls him, did sign off, and I'm not being derisive, I hold no political views here, did actually sign off on the Anti-Discrimination Act. So I think your concerns are very real. There's a tremendous balance necessary between the importance of this. Again, Dr. Crowley talked about segmentation of the market. And one example is actually now an FDA-approved drug, Bidal, specifically for African Americans because they respond differently in terms of blood pressure and congestive heart failure. Nir, you wanted to, do we have microphone for other individuals?
Yeah. Something that maybe will bring it together. First of all, I share the concern that for you, genetic testing and cholesterol testing is different. And from my perspective, it's the same. You know, there's no really difference. But I want to tell you the other side. For us to go through the IRB and us to have a genetic studies or then to get funded by the NIH, we have a lot of procedures that we have to show that we're protecting the people. For me, the funniest thing was when I went with my centenarian and say that I'm going to look for good genes, not bad genes, they were stunned. You know, if I would go and say I want to look for cancer, it would have taken years, you know, to get this approval. And for me, they just didn't know what to do. On the other hand, when my program was reviewed by the NIH, my funding was delayed for about half a year. Why? Because I said, you know, if somebody comes to me and say, I want to know if I have a longevity gene, I said, you know, I'm not going to say I'm going to tell him, but if somebody comes, I'll let them know. And they said, this is unacceptable. And I said, why it's unacceptable? He said, you cannot give any genetic information without having a genetic counsel. So I said, so let's go over that. So there's a 100-year-old guy, and he comes to me, and I said, do I have longevity gene? And surprised, I said, you have a longevity gene, but I have to give you a counsel. And what is he going to say? I needed an economical counsel when I was 50, right, in order to get here. I don't need a genetic counsel. Just to tell you, this is all over the place, but for us and the community, it's very important for you to know that it's not only research to understanding diseases. Eventually, those are going to be tests that will direct us to the correct drugs and to risks and to other things, and we're going to improve the health tremendously, just like we do other tests.
Thank you, Nir. I asked Hal Strelnick to give us a brief synopsis of this network of community partnerships that have been built over the years, primarily through Montefiore, through the Department of Family Medicine, and now Hal's integration of these programs into the CTSA vision. So, Hal, do you want to do it from the podium, or since your microphone was taken away? And this is the worst thing I could possibly do to an academic, even a community academic. Who, by the way, we were in medical school together, if you can't tell, elsewhere. And that is to ask him to talk without slides. So forgive me, Hal, but if you could just give us a bit of a picture of how not only Paloma's urban health plan, but other components of the community are part of this network for us.
Thank you, Harry, for putting me on the spot. So I'll talk with my hands, right? First of all, I want to thank Paloma for coming. I think she was expressed something that I have felt very strongly. I share, as a primary care physician and someone interested in the social determinants of health, a perspective that the scientific community does have an obsession with genetics, which is, if you think of it, largely a conservative perspective that things are there and that society as a whole didn't create that, but it has created many of the conditions which we have sort of moved to the margins of the scientific enterprise, even though the evidence for the importance of the social determinants have really grown, and the community knows that, and that needs to have a more central place in the scientific endeavor on how to solve these problems, because if you look at the patterns, you start introducing not just the Ashkenazi Jewish community that Nir has been studying, but other groups, that there are clearly group members that live to 106, like the woman that Barack Obama described, but also that there are so many who fail to get to 60, where Nir is starting to look at that because of so many other factors that are social in nature, and that we have to do that. And that part of the meeting the community halfway involves recognizes those, working on those, and trying to find solutions that are not going to be found in individuals' bodies, but rather in the social relationships and the collaboration, which is part of the message that the scientific enterprise has to be thinking in terms of teams outside of disciplines in more collaborative ways that not only includes other scientists, but includes clinicians and partners in the community that come with that additional perspective. What we have proposed as a part of the Bronx Center to Reduce and Eliminate Health Disparities and the CTSA is to respond to what we saw when Paloma was speaking as eloquently to the site visitors from the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute for the Hispanic Community Health Study, which is now SOUL, the study of Latinos, speaking about this from that perspective. And we had a argument, or a debate, more than a debate, it was an argument in front of the site visitors after a presentation about a genetic study was presented, hadn't been on the published agenda. It was something that was important to a number of investigators, and the whole paradigm of investigator-initiated studies. The community wants community-oriented studies. The academy wants investigator, and those two are very radically different paradigms in terms of how you advance what we all know and what we all would like to get to, which is the improvement of our community's health, of human health in general. Out of that argument, we saw the opportunity that people in the community really care about what the research is. And so what we've proposed and are trying to get up and running and have the funding for is a community-based research review board, which will work with investigators to help them tailor their work to both the questions that the community is most concerned about and also how to do that, and how to do that as a partnership. It's going to be based at the Bronx Health Link, which is a community-based organization run by Joanne Casado, who was the person at the site visit who was arguing with the geneticists about that prospect. And we're hoping that that process of having that dialogue will enrich the investigators, it will enrich the community in their understanding of the process, and that we can move towards a model not where you have a community member on an IRB, but you have a community-based IRB. And we've taken as our model the Native communities that have engaged in this. And if I remember correctly, when the issue of genetic research was on the front page of the New York Times about a year and a half ago, it was a Native community that was objecting to how this could stigmatize a whole community in terms of the legacy that we have with, and sickle cell anemia is a good example of what happened with sickle cell trait to people, and you couldn't become a flight pilot or an airline pilot if you had sickle cell trait. I mean, these where there was no scientific evidence, but it had lots of public consequences. And I think and we can go through a long list of where there have been concerns raised about identifying particular communities. These partnerships, I think, I always think of it as growing out of the Bronx's necessity to work together, because it is the poorest, not only the poorest congressional district, it's the poorest urban county in America. We have to work together because we're in the shadow of that island south of us with all of those great medical centers and all that philanthropy, and and we get what's left over. We're sort of a colony, and so we've had to work together. And I think Paloma's work is an example that doesn't mean that the people here aren't doing exemplary work that a lot of others should know about. And I think I hope that that partnership continues, and a lot of that partnership has been by necessity, that we can't do it by ourselves, and we need partners like Paloma to do that.
For a moment to the issue of increasing the representation, more diversity in investigators. This was another one of the issues, and you've taken a leadership role there.
And this is why I'm filling the time to get Joe Crowley here, because Representative Crowley was a big advocate for us in helping to establish the Hispanic Center of Excellence here, which was our first center with the explicit role of helping the pipeline, starting from students through medical school into residency and members of the faculty, developing their careers and supporting their work, and helping young faculty and enter the CRT program, the master's program in science, to develop investigators. The federal dollars had strings attached. It meant that we could only give them to Hispanics, and we're able to do that. We took that model, we've expanded it with the Bronx CREED, which is our Health Disparities Center, which is also which is NIH funded, so that we have investigators. Shadi Navi, who's one of the poster presenters at lunchtime, is one of our fellows who graduated from the CRT program in June, and we have our fellows are half minority, half majority, but people who are interested in health disparities, and we've continued that process. We've gotten funding from the Josiah Macy Foundation to have a minority faculty development program through the Northeast Consortium, and actually we were in this room filled like it is today in June. Only all of the people, or not all of the people, but almost all of the people were faculty of color who have come together from 4 institutions, again, competing on one hand, but working together with Mount Sinai, with Penn, with New Jersey Medical School, in order to do something that we can do better collaboratively than we could do by ourselves. And we're hoping to continue that.
Thank you, Hal. Do you do soft shoe also? Thank you very much. Vic.
Hi. There's a low level of scientific knowledge in this country, and I would guess that's even worse in your neighborhood. We've talked a lot about providing care to the community, about doing research with or on the community, depending on your perspective. But maybe one way we could help would be to partner with you in terms of science education. And I know we have a program with Pelham High School. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. We may or may not have programs with high schools to come into our laboratories and our investigators to go into high schools. That is to say, to educate and come around common conversations having to do with what is science, what is genetics, what is its use, et cetera, et cetera. That seems to me to be a program that sort of lifts both boats, doesn't it?
This takes us to the Science Education Partnership Program, and Paloma and Hal will address that.
I think you're absolutely correct, and how you build those venues to be able to provide that kind of education is really important. And I think the challenge is to the center that's housed now at Bronx Health Link to figure out how you actually do that, and that one of your strategic goals is to assure that the community becomes more literate in the sciences, and leading to the field of genetics, because it's invaluable, and we're not going to move much ahead unless we understand it well. But there has to be a real plan of action around how we do that.
The first NIH grant that I got when my career changed was from NCRR, the National Center for Research Resources, which was a Science Education Partnership Award, which is called SEPA. The focus on that is science education, and a recognition that the NIH had that we have to improve science understanding to continue on the continuing support for NIH. And as we start seeing the international comparisons, that the entire American population is sinking in terms of its scientific and mathematical literacy. It's not just communities like the South Bronx, it is all of the country. Our project was a project where we partnered with the New York Hall of Science and the New York Academy of Medicine, and it was really a teacher training program where we tried to enrich the experience of teachers so that they would be more effective, thinking this is a kind of community benefit that stays in the community, rather than programs where you take the best and the brightest kids and you help them achieve, and then the community has lost their best and brightest. So we've had some difficulty making getting that to work, because if you've can imagine trying to have the partner of the New York City Department of Education over the last few years. There's so many musical chairs happening at the ground level, and but we have developed partnerships with some of the New York Botanical Gardens, the Bronx Zoo, these as potential partners in trying to go forward with this. But I'm committed to the model of teacher training to enrich and keep people in the communities, and we have good partnerships. We have some ongoing programs going in middle schools, and particularly DeWitt Clinton High School, to kind of continue that through working with our medical students that spend time in encouraging the students to pursue careers in science and in health-related careers.
Actually, one of the initiatives we're involved in is developing a charter school that my dad is really spearheading, so that it would be the Dr. Izquierdo School for Health and Sciences in the South Bronx, with the idea that ultimately we would be able to increase the number of students going and going into the healthcare field, but the focus would be health and science. So it's recognized that that really is a huge need.
You mentioned the New York Academy of Medicine and some partnerships you have with them. Many people perhaps are unaware, it bears on Dr. Schuster's question. I am on the board now of the New York Academy of Medicine, and they do have a fellows program where these are students from New York area schools who actually get involved in a whole range. Is that what you're referring to, or your partnership is different than that?
No, they've been for specific research projects.
Right. And the other thing that bears on this is that at least before the New York State budget tanked, there were reputedly to be Governor Patterson's initiative of several $100 million for stem cell, not just research, but education. And one of the programs that's being implemented, and hopefully will still follow through in terms of the budget money, is educating both the public as well as students at a variety of levels, using maybe stem cell research. It's, in addition to genetics, that's had certain resonance as well, but quite significant and a good opportunity, I think, to educate the public. I think that Vic's point really bears very, very heavily on what we've been discussing here, though. It's an issue not just of science literacy, that's relevant to the pipeline and getting more diverse investigator, but health literacy. And to a certain extent, I know from the Times just the other day, and I wonder, in terms of health disparities, how many people in your community have access to the internet or use Google, for example? I suspect it's a lower number. Zero. No? Please. So
I think that's really one of the misconceptions that exist. The technology divide doesn't really exist in our communities. People really believe that, but everyone is on the internet. Now they may access it through through the libraries, through other sources, but there are lots of people who have access to the internet.
So let me comment. That's encouraging, because if you saw the Times article, they thought that a very, very early way to track flu epidemics actually comes from people sticking into Google the query flu symptoms or flu, etc. And it turned out that that was actually several weeks ahead of the standard CDC and other techniques. So I'm encouraged that you're saying the technological divide. One other thing that's relevant to your comments and Hal's in terms of community participatory research, some of our board members who started out in the Bronx are actually proud of those origins and give back. So we are fortunate that we'll be implementing a major community-based cancer prevention control program. A very distinguished investigator, Dr. Bruce Rapkin, and his colleagues, whom we recruited from Memorial Sloan Kettering. So we actually do move people from that island south of here to the Bronx, and to do really very significant work. And I don't know if you're familiar with him, but we'll reach out to your area, because he is really steeped in this whole idea of community participatory research. And specifically, he's had some projects in Queens, and I understand from him that the libraries in Queens are the most heavily utilized libraries, perhaps anywhere. So maybe this is one of the places that the internet can be accessed. So Harry, let me turn it back to you. I'm getting reports, and I apologize to the audience, that Congressman Crowley is supposedly on his way. Break and do it. Okay. So
just one
go
more
ahead, Harry.
comment. Jonathan, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to respond to both the Dean and Dr. Schuster's point before. What do you think of when we did studies through HRSA with evaluating community knowledge about genetics, it was kind of surprising to us when we went to many health centers such as the Urban Health Plan, what the top reasons that people thought people would go for genetic tests. What would you guess? The number one was paternity testing, and the number two, forensics, crime scene investigation. So that was shocking to us because it wasn't even on the list of where we were thinking about talking about testing. So I think that epitomizes the gap.
That's a very, very telling point. And let me leave the forensic one because that has obvious implications. But the paternity one, people in the audience know, one of the classic ethical dilemmas when you're doing one of these studies and you have informed consent and you determine that the paternity is not what people think it is. What do you do about that? What are the obligations? So that's quite a telling point.